What's up, my beautiful people? Exile451 here with yet another daily dose of Reddit Happy. And just because school's suspended doesn't mean we can't get you some edumacation. So, today we're going into r/AskReddit for some of history's most ridiculous stories. Alright, so the AskReddit question was, historians of Reddit, what is the funniest/most ridiculous story from history that you know of? And let me tell you, there are some interesting ones here. Elmer McCurdy. He was a really inept train robber. He once tried to blow up a safe to get some silver coins and ended up melting the safe and the coins. Another time, he tried to rob a train, but all they were able to get was some whiskey and like $15 from the conductor. After that, he holed up at a farm, drank all the whiskey, and got into a shootout with the sheriff. Then died in 1911. But that's not the end of the story. No, they took him to the funeral home and he was embalmed with a lot of arsenic because they thought it'd be a while before someone claimed the body. And they were right, because no one came to claim him. And the funeral director was like, I'm making money off this guy, and put him on display as an Oklahoma man outlaw and charged money to see him. You put money in his mouth. The funeral director's kids used to put Elmer on roller skates and scare other children with him. Eventually, these two dudes came over and were like, oh, our poor brother Elmer, we must take him home. They weren't his brothers. They were sideshow operators. Elmer was on the circuit now. He went places. He was sold a few more times, ended up in a museum, and they rented him out. He was in a movie theater lobby as a hophead who tried to hold up a store and was shot in order to promote an anti-drug film. But it's been decades, and he's starting to look a little rough. All desiccated and missing a couple of fingers in his hair. They rent him out to a display at Niagara Falls, and they send him back because they think he's a really creepy waxwork. Yep, it's been so long, no one remembers he's a real dead guy. He gets sold to the Pike, this rundown pier amusement park in Long Beach, California. He's hung up in Laugh in the Dark, their ghost/funhouse ride. The Pike is a terrible park, but it's cheap to film at. In December of 1976, they're filming an episode of The $6 Million Man, and they're in Laugh in the Dark moving stuff around, and they move this painted neon orange dummy. And its arm breaks off. And it's a real arm. And it's a real dead guy, painted orange, and incredibly mummified. He's eventually taken to the coroner, eventually identified, and then eventually buried in Boot Hill in Oklahoma, under concrete so he can't go wandering again. That just reminds me of the story of Oliver Cromwell out in London, you know, the guy who kind of overthrew the king to establish parliament and everything else. Controversial figure, I know, but as I recall, after he was dead, he was posthumously dug up and beheaded for his crimes before being put in like a store window or something like that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but that's what I seem to remember reading at one point. Still though, that is that is a nuts story. Oh my gosh. I'm personally a huge fan of the story of the Siege of Tyre. Tyre was an ancient city, massively fortified. Basically an impregnable island fortress. Now, impregnable isn't a word Alexander the Great is okay with. Confronted with the reality that, besieging an island fortress that is a powerful navy is a difficult, almost impossible endeavor, Alexander the amazingly persistent decided on the only reasonable course of action left to him. Turn the island into a peninsula by building a huge land bridge. TLDR, you can't conquer an island fortress, they said. Then I'll make you not an island, said Alexander the more than adequate. Well, apparently when life gives you lemons, turn an island into a peninsula. That's the moral of the story here. War in the 6th century was usually a fairly brutal affair. When a city was captured, its people were often enslaved or killed. So, when, during the Byzantine-Sasanian Wars, Khosrau I of Persia successfully besieged Antioch, its inhabitants were understandably somewhat nervous. However, rather than enslaving them or killing them, Khosrau brought the city's population in its entirety back to Persia and rebuilt them an almost exact replica of Antioch, down to the layout of the city and rooms in the houses. the people were freed and made into full Persian citizens. The city was named Way Antioch Khosrau, meaning Khosrau's better Antioch. And he took great pride in ensuring that it saw greater prosperity than the Byzantine version. Huh. Well, I guess that's winning hearts and minds in a way. Diamond Jim Brady was one of the richest men in late 19th century America. He was famous for living large, throwing lavish parties, and was a big eater. When he threw a party at Delmonico's in New York, they saved the champagne corks, and he was never happier than when they were brought to him in a couple of laundry baskets. He was also a teetotaler. He never drank wine or liquor because he believed them to be bad for his health. Instead, he drank orange juice by the gallon. He died of kidney stones, which his doctor blamed on drinking too much orange juice. Oh, that's gotta be a miserable way to die. Oh, that's gotta be brutal. How about the trial of Pope Formosus, who was dead? Yes, that's right, the time they dug up the corpse of a former pope to put on trial. I'm not a historian, so I'll just summarize. Formosus became pope in 891 CE, and in those days, as with most of history, the papacy is just a way to important families to exert control over each other. He dies in 896, and people start rioting, so they get a new guy in ASAP. Boniface IV, who dies from gout after 15 days, only for Stephen VI to step in, who, surprise, is backed by the faction that was rival to Formosus. Stephen VI then digs up the body of Formosus and promptly finds him guilty of a bunch of things. They cut off 3 of his fingers, used for blessings, invalidate most things he did as pope, strip him of his fancy robes, and bury him in a commoner's grave. Then, later, Stephen VI is still mad, so they dig him up again, only this time, they just tie weights to the body and chuck it into a river. Luckily, a monk manages to drag it out later, but wait, there's more. Well, it turns out chucking former popes into the Tiber doesn't go over well in Rome. So the people rioted, again, and tossed Stephen VI in jail. And by 897, he's been strangled to death in his prison cell. But hold up, because in 897/98, the next 2 popes, yes, 2, have new trials that reverse all the crap Stephen VI tried to pull, and more importantly, also makes the rule of no more digging up people for trials, which was a pretty good move until in 904 when Sergius III overturns the rulings of the last 2 guys and he promptly finds Formosus guilty again. Man, what did this guy do? Seriously. Follow up on that one though. I teach medieval history and I always show them the painting you included. Click the link in the original post. You won't be disappointed. The only thing that would make it better would be someone using his cadaverous head like a puppet to answer questions. Another interesting posthumous medieval life occurred in Portugal. Let me tell you the story of King Pedro I. Before he was king, Pedro fell in love. It was not with his wife Costanza, however, but with his wife's cousin and lady-in-waiting, Inés de Castro. Henry VIII went through a series of his wives' ladies-in-waiting, including Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour. Pedro wasn't particularly circumspect about his love for Inés, and after Costanza died, Inés was exiled. King Alfonso, Pedro's father, kept suggesting new wives for Pedro, but he refused, and continued his relationship with Inés, with whom he had 4 children. Eventually, when Pedro was away, King Alfonso had Inés murdered in front of one of her children. When Pedro found out, he launched Portugal into a short-lived civil war. Now for the corpsey times. In 1357, King Alfonso died, and Pedro became King of Portugal. And he was still royally ticked about what had happened to Inés. He had her killers brought back to Portugal, and according to one writer at the time, Pedro ripped their hearts out with his own hands. But he wasn't done. According to legend, he had the body of Inés dug up, dressed in jewels and silks, and placed on a throne, crowned posthumously as queen. Then King Pedro I made all of his vassals kiss her hand, which, since she'd been dead for 2 years, couldn't have been very pleasant. And it led to this amazing painting. Ultimately, Pedro and Inés were buried next to each other, so that during the Last Judgment, they would see each other. The tomb is inscribed with "Until the End of the World" in Portuguese. A romantic and sometimes totally crazy story. That's really sweet in its own kinda sorta morbid way. Life truly is stranger than fiction. From Wikipedia. One ancient account of the death of Chrysippus, the 3rd century BC Greek Stoic philosopher, tells us that he died of laughter after he saw a donkey eating his figs. He told a slave to give the donkey neat wine with which to wash them down, and then, having laughed too much, he died. A dude literally laughed himself to death after seeing a donkey eating fruit. I thought that was just a thing that happened in The Sims. I didn't realize that was an actual thing, that you could actually laugh yourself to death. Oh my gosh. That's crazy. Johnny Cash was the first American to hear about the death of Joseph Stalin. He was working as a radio operator for the military at the time of Stalin's death and was the first person to receive the message. Go figure. Roland the Farter was a court jester in the 13th century who was given a 30-acre farm and manor house by King Henry II. In return, he was required to entertain at the king's annual Christmas party with an act called A Leap, a Whistle, and a Fart. What? Can I get that job? I mean, seriously. I'd happily take a 30-acre farm and manor house just to have to do a little song, dance, and fart once a year for a king. Andrew Jackson's assassination attempt. The fellow ran up to him and tried to shoot him, and had a misfire. Luckily, he had another pistol, tried to shoot him again, and had another misfire. Andrew proceeded to beat him with his cane. Talk about bad luck. Couple of follow-ups on that though. It gets wilder. They examined the guns after and they worked perfectly. If I remember correctly, the problem was not with the guns, but with the air itself. Flintlock pistols, having the ignition mechanism exposed to the air, would not be able to fire in sufficiently humid environments. Jackson was at a funeral in a damp cemetery only a day after a heavy rain, making it the absolute worst time and place to use a flintlock pistol. Yeah, I could see that being a problem. After the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Austria, the event which many attribute as the catalyst to World War I, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, King George V of England, and Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany all wrote a series of letters to each other for a month deciding what they should do. Should we go to war, should we not? Very casually. The three men, being cousins, addressed each other as Willie, Nicky, and Georgie in their letters. World War I was a war that started out as almost a sport or gentleman's game because of three sociopathic family members, basically. I did not know that. I didn't know they were related. Follow-up? I still think my favorite World War I catalyst story is of the guy that attempted to assassinate Franz Ferdinand, failed to, accidentally blew up a completely different car, then immediately attempted to kill himself by taking a cyanide capsule and throwing himself off a bridge, expecting to land in a river. Only to land in a dried-up ravine, throw up the pill, and get the crap beat out of him by the crowd of people very angry about the car he randomly blew up. Oh. Wow. Not a historian, but my mom tells stories from living in Key West in the 80s. My favorite is the Conch Republic. Basically, coke was the main source of income for them at the time, and Florida cracked down on smuggling by searching cars and etc. In response, Key West withdrew from the US, called themselves the Conch Republic, declared war, fired one shot at the mainland, then surrendered and requested federal aid. I have absolutely no idea if it's true, but it used to make me cackle. And follow up to that, when I visited Key West, I was told that the Border Patrol established a border checkpoint somewhere in the Keys, so that if you were leaving Key West, it was as if you were crossing a border to another country. So then the Conch Republic was formed, which lasted all of one day. Oh. Oh. Florida man has existed for a long time, it seems. That was r/AskReddit, and if you're looking for more funny or uplifting AskReddit content, then go ahead and check out the playlist link in the description below. Also, if you know someone that could use some happiness or positivity in their life, feel free to share this, because I know that right now, with everything going on, smiling and laughing can be a pretty important thing. Now, you guys have a great weekend, stay safe, stay healthy, I will see you all on Monday. Until then, I'm Exile451, stay beautiful, people.